The history of Elden Ring's world is vast, mind-bogglingly so. It almost parallels our own world's history for its complexity and depth. One aspect of its history that has intrigued me recently is the introduction of the finger mimic mushroom. The fingers have been speculated by many to be based on the famous plant, the dead man's fingers, and rightly so. However, the part of the finger mimic mushroom's description that intrigues me was that the mushroom induced hallucination. Light pink mushroom, resembling a wizened finger. Material used for crafting items. Exceedingly rare to find. Used by those that wish to become fingers to induce hallucinations. They call these mushrooms the stillborn of the two fingers. Used by those who wish to become fingers to induce hallucinations. This to me is a very specific verb to use in regards to something like this. Not consume, not cook, nor cultivate, use like they are a tool. Looking for more related item descriptions to this idea of them being used potentially to achieve spiritual enlightenment, I came to this. A record of crafting techniques left by a determined student of the finger ruins. His brush with the sublime all but shattered his mind, though he was left capable enough to leave these few precious words. Acquire the knowledge to craft the following. This is an interesting item to me because it perfectly encapsulates the seemingly transcendent spiritual experience that psychedelic drugs can offer, and the feeling of when you come back to reality from this, like you can barely describe it with words. In fact, we see a spirit undergoing this experience in the finger weaver's hovel. He is seemingly overcome by a fit of religious fervor. He proclaims that his theory about the fingers and their origins is true, and that he will soon be caressed in the bosom of the exalted mother. And a huge part of me wonders if he is hallucinating on finger mimic mushrooms. Now there is another connection here, and that is the Beastman. Short sword given to high-ranking clergymen of Farum Azula. Raises potency of bestial incantations. The design celebrates a beast's 5 fingers, symbolic of the intelligence once granted upon their kind. There is a theory called the Stoned Ape theory, basically that psilocybin mushrooms were directly responsible for the incredibly quick and dramatic size increase in the brains of early humans. I do think that in Elden Ring there is a narrative here between the development of religious ideas and intelligence being guided from the shadows by the influence of the two fingers. I think Meta possibly arrived during ancient times, likely during the era of ancient dragons and beastmen, and that she had a hand, see what I did there, in the development of the beastman culture and of their intellect. To me, this is also implied by the fact that gold was such a large part of their worship, as evidenced by their burial rituals, and also that the ancient dragons are associated with this gold via Placidusax. His breath attacks and his blood is golden like the elden beasts. It is also said this gold is primordial and originates from the Crucible era, where it took a copper tinge. The Crucible Knights wear armor made out of this gold and wield weapons made out of it as well. Even the incantations of the ancient dragons are said to be red due to them being imbued with this gold. Now if we compare the scale on the Gravelstone seal with the scales of Placidusax, we see a similar hue of gold patterned in. Another place we see this is in the finger ruins, where this primordial gold is imbued into the finger stones. To me, this implies that the two fingers, and thus Meta, arrived an extremely long time ago, and have been guiding the evolution of life in the lands between since prehistoric times, by granting life expanded intellect and religious ideas through mushrooms and hallucinations. Mushrooms, specifically psychoactive substances, are undeniably tied to the evolution of humanity in our world. And on that note, let us explore the substance called Soma and the related god that comes from the ancient texts called the Rig Vedas, and how it relates to the mushroom. Soma is a rather interesting substance. Capable of seemingly bridging the gap between man and the divine, it was said to provide great euphoria in its imbiber. But the Stoned Ape theory is criticized because of it seemingly not actually granting the evolutionary traits mentioned. One area psychedelic mushrooms are referred to as potentially the legitimate source of something is with the substance Soma that is said to be extracted from a plant. For a long time, this source was debated, and then in the 1960s a discovery was made. An elaborate cloth tapestry dating back to the 1st century BCE, found in a deep Xiongnu grave hidden in a thicker wooded pass. Said to be a divine miracle that it survived in such good condition for 2,000 years. A priest with the divine mushroom in his hand. The question of what plant was used to prepare Soma, the drink of the gods that the ancient Iranians and Indians consumed, has been debated for over 100 years. There was many theories on where the origin of Soma came from ephedra, cannabis and opium poppy to oriental lotus. All researchers agree that ancient Iranians and Indians used for cult purposes a drink containing a psychoactive substance. With this find, there was one solid theory on which plant was used to create the extract that made it. The greatest authority and translator on the Rig Veda, which is the religious text the Soma comes from, wrote, "Judging by the Rig Veda hymns, Soma was not only a stimulating but a hallucinating drink. It is difficult to be more particular, not only because none of the candidates satisfies all the same properties and matches the Soma descriptions found in the hymns. Soma was also a god and a substance associated with fertility and medicine, sometimes represented as an embryo, other times shown to be a bull. Hindu texts say that Soma guards the nectar of immortality, which is only allowed to be consumed by the gods themselves. Soma rides across the sky in a chariot pulled by white horses. When the gods drink some of the elixir of immortality stored in the moon, they drink away the sum of the moon's life force, causing the moon to shrink or wane.
This sort of plant substance was prepared and ingested by a priesthood who then used the ecstatic experience induced by that plant as the basis for all of their metaphysical and philosophical speculations on the nature of the universe.
Now, how do we bring this back to Elden Ring? I think the absolutely colossal mass of flowers at the shaman village at least implies to me that the shamans knew about bees and or tended to them. There's also a significant amount of hay bales littered around the village and the Bonnie village, which to me implies a certain level of agriculture, which is also notable given the presence of hay bales at the celebrants' village. It is very possible to me that the shamans were using honey to preserve finger mimic mushrooms. Now, why do I think this? Well, the celebrants at the windmill village to me are visually connected to the shaman. They had the same kind of houses, they have a similar obsession with flowers, they are clearly matriarchal, and to me, they are tripping balls. Dancing mania is a curious phenomenon and has occurred numerous times throughout history. The earliest known outbreak of dancing mania occurred in the 7th century, with numerous outbreaks after this. In one incident, a large group of children travelled from Erfurt to Arnstadt, or around 20 kilometers, or 12 miles for you Americans. Another incident in 1278 involved around 200 people dancing on a bridge over the river of Moose, resulting in its collapse. Bartholomew describes how dancers wore strange, colourful attire and held wooden sticks. Some believe that dancing could have been brought on by food poisoning caused by the production of ergot, which grows commonly on grains such as rye, used for baking bread, ergot containing the same ingredient in LSD. Given the celebrants had areas described as pastures, and they also had cattle such as horses, and the last thing missing, well, possibly the grain that we see on the gravesite plains. In conclusion, I could really go on and on here about the evolutionary origin of religion and language, and how that relates to altered states of consciousness, and about how the spirits of the lands between always seem to manifest with tiny spirit mushrooms. Why is any of this relevant to the plot of Elden Ring? Well, what if the Two Fingers have been co-opting the power of the Crucible since the beginning of history itself? Is the power of gold that represents their power not the power and influence not itself an altered version of primordial gold of the Crucible Knights? Is rot not an intrinsic part of nature and a beneficial, inert, benevolent force that can be used for our benefit depending on our perspective? Could the Nox have used magic to create a black hole, their black moon, which then allowed an eldritch horror beyond our comprehension into the world, and then we blamed that on God's ire? Are the Elden Beast and Meta just cosmic horrors that have found their way to our world to gain control over the power of the Crucible? What if, as Terence McKenna stated, that the earliest residents of the lands between used the ecstatic experience induced by plants and hallucinogenics as the basis for all of their metaphysical and philosophical speculations on the nature of the universe? One of the main themes in Elden Ring is the merging of the physical and the divine, the microcosm of ourselves reflecting the macrocosm of the universe and the gods. What if God's grace and guidance was a physical object we could see? What if God's order and laws was a physical object we could touch? The Two Fingers themselves are an ancient symbol for the union of God and man, when the Catholics do the sign of the cross. Marika and Radagon in their iconic poses represent the Vitruvian man, which itself represents the union of man and divine. With what we find out from Ymir's dialogue, the Two Fingers and Meta are broken and unhinged, and aren't getting any real divine guidance any longer. Yet the hallucinations their mushrooms cause, paradoxically, would, instead of looking outward for divine knowledge to outer gods and their representatives, we began to look inward to ourselves for the inner gods. Just as the macrocosm reflects the microcosm, this makes the gods real, regardless of if they're even truly real or not, because they exist in the mental landscape of the world. The inward journey towards divine knowledge is just as valid as the outward one. I will leave you with 3 item descriptions which I think are connected and encapsulate this idea. Be skeptical of imitators of divinity, and true guidance and self-actualization can be attained by seeking unrefined guidance, as this can lead to truer encounters. And most of all, be kind to yourself and others even when no one was watching. Embrace the whole of it.